United Nations General Assembly. We're joined tonight from New York by Voice of America correspondent Peter Clottey. Peter, welcome to Newzroom Afrika. Good to have your time. So, President Ramaphosa speaking then at one of the side events about sustainable development goals. They're a big target for the United Nations as a body. What is the consensus as far as how well world leaders have done in meeting those goals?
Well, thank you very much for having me. The two-day Sustainable Development Goals meeting this year ends tomorrow. It started today, ends tomorrow. And there have been concerns that a lot of African countries, although are doing well, have not been able to really catch up. So with this halfway to 2030 target, they decided that this is a time to come together, rally around, come up with, measures to jumpstart the effort so they will meet the target. Let us remind ourselves that this year's Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs Summit, which kicked off today, ends tomorrow, September 19 in New York, but it also makes a new phase of what experts call accelerated progress towards the Sustainable Development Goal, with high-level political guidance on transformative and accelerated actions ahead of the 2030 target. Now, the president of the UN General Assembly convened this to mark the halfway point to the deadline set for achieving the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And now it will be the centerpiece of the high-level week during this summit at the UN called ANGA, and will also respond to the impact of multiple and interlocking crises facing the world. And it's expected, after the summit tomorrow, when it ends, to reignite a sense of hope, optimism, and enthusiasm for the 2030 agenda. So let's hope that these will be realized.
And one of the things President Ramaphosa touched on, Peter, today, reiterating a point perhaps from the last COP summit, climate conference, which was held in Egypt towards the end of last year, was about, when you look at the issue of climate, sustained financial support. Is there a sense at the UN this year that the wealthier nations are in fact going to do good on that issue?
Well, the key agenda on the 78th session of the UN General Assembly will primarily focus on the climate crisis and the ongoing war in Ukraine. And as you know, over 140 world leaders and governments will be present for the high-level debate. Now, as you also know, a lot of African countries bear the brunt, they say, of the climate change and crisis, and have been calling on wealthier nations to help finance efforts to cushion the effects of climate change. And the African Union and its member countries, including South Africa, have been unanimous in calling on wealthier nations not only to make lip service or promises, but to show commitment by putting their money where their mouth is in order to help with efforts by these African countries to cushion the effects that are of the climate crisis affecting their children. So let's see if this commitment African leaders are calling for will be realized this time. But there appears to be willingness of the wealthier nations or Western nations to engage because they see this as some of the things that they have contributed to, that African leaders say have accelerated the climate crisis that they face and that they bear the brunt of.
And on the issue of Ukraine, worth noting that when the debate does happen in the General Assembly, the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, will not be there, represented instead by his Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, because of that International Criminal Court arrest warrant. We're expecting, there are murmurs that President Zelensky of Ukraine may actually attend in person this year, but is it likely that the UN General Assembly will reach consensus on that issue, considering that Africa, for example, has chosen during previous votes to basically abstain?
Well, there's hope by observers that the UN General Assembly, with this high-level debate, will try to come up with a consensus to resolving this ongoing conflict in Ukraine, or war in Ukraine. Because a lot of African countries, for example, have expressed concern that the ongoing war is affecting their economies. The impact has been disastrous. A lot of African countries are expressing high inflation. Prices of goods have skyrocketed. Their public sector workers, private sector workers have been restless, calling for increased pay, and some of these countries are unable for the time being to meet these challenges. So there's a call, unanimous call, if you may, by these African countries to have this resolved amicably, so things will go back to normal, so they'll be able to come up with measures, strategic measures, they say, in order to meet the challenges of the global economic impact the crisis or the ongoing war is having on their respective countries. So let's hope that what experts are expecting will be a solution to resolve this ongoing war in Ukraine will come out and will be embraced by all.
And while we're talking about the conflict in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces, Peter, there's also a fair deal of turmoil, more than a fair share, in fact, in Africa, because just this year alone we've had more than one coup, not least of which the one in Niger. Gabon also experiencing turmoil.
Well, it is so. And, you know, the African Union, for example, has come up with a unanimous position to suspend, for example, some of these countries that have recently had forceful overthrow of what many describe as legitimately elected government. And they have a zero tolerance for that. ECOWAS has a similar stance. But the question is, people are also raising concerns about whether these actions happening, including the forceful overthrow of this government by military juntas, have wide support from the population. Sometimes, there have been reports of anti-Francophone or anti-French sentiment that they said might have fueled some of these upheavals ongoing. So let's see how the world leaders, once this debate effectively begins tomorrow, Tuesday, will come up with solutions to try to address some of these worrying trends.
Peter Clottey, fantastic reporting from New York, Voice of America correspondent Peter Clottey. Good to speak to you from the United Nations General Assembly in New York.